You're listening to a Time Machine podcast. Old Movie Time Machine. An adventure through time and or space.
Dishes are done, man.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Old Movie Time Machine. Oops, all 90s. That's right. This is the show in which we watch color motion picture films made between the years of, I guess, 1989 and 1999 this time around. And we use these films as windows into the past. We climb through the window and we examine the world beyond. The people, the places, the sights, the sounds, the smells, all of it. And while we're on our journey, we ask ourselves these critical questions, such as these people we're looking at in the 1990s. Who are these people? Hey, wait a minute. That's my sister, Carolyn Naoroz. She's from the 90s. Who's that over there? That's Shrishma Naik. She was in the 90s, too.
Hey.
And who's this? Hey, I'm just looking in the mirror over here. That's me. I was in the 1990s. I remember this shit, everybody. But we have to ask ourselves, but just from now, 21st century people, as we are, we have to look back and see where we came from. Or if you prefer, from whence we came. Anyway, at the end of the show, we're going to ask ourselves all these questions about what we're looking at here. We're going to compare and contrast with today and back then and all this. And then at the end of the show, we're going to ask ourselves the final, vital, ultimate question on behalf of all of humanity here in the early 21st century, which is, hey, you guys, this undoubtedly classy movie from the 1990s that we just watched, do we keep watching this thing? Is there something of value here that needs to be passed on to the next generation and the generation after that, etc., etc.? We're going to find out. I'm your host, by the way, through time and or space, Justin Zeppa, joined as ever by my panel of incredible international experts at being human in the early 21st century. I'm joined, of course, by the one and only Shrishma Naik. Hey, Shrishy Boo.
Hello.
And then my sister and yours, Carolyn Naoroz. Hello, sis.
Hey there.
Guys, today we're talking about the 1994 classic question mark. We're going to find out. Reality Bites. It's a Winona Wednesday, you guys. We're checking in with my 90s girlfriend, Winona Ryder. Had lots of 90s crushes back in the day, but of all the 90s crushes, there's one at the top. And her name is Winona Ryder, and she is 5 feet 1 inches tall. She is just the tiniest thing, and she is in this movie. Any thoughts on Winona right off the bat before I get into my whole spiel here? This is a me pick again. If you weren't joining us last week, I've decided to choose this movie because it really sums up a lot of core 90s elements that we really need to dive further into. But any Winona thoughts, you guys? How do you feel about Winona?
I love Winona.
Her. Yeah, same.
But this is not a movie I love.
No, not at all.
So,
it
was okay.
This movie doesn't get made until Winona signs on, is the thing.
Right.
So we can also blame her for Reality Bites, in a sense. She's responsible for the ideal fixation. However, this movie may or may not, we're going to discuss it, have been executed well. And, the end results, we could trace, but we could if we wanted to, and I don't want to, but we could trace that back to Winona saying, yes, this is, I'd like to do this movie. Let's make this movie. Shrishma, I'm sorry, I interrupted your thoughts on Winona, and I'd never want to do that for anybody, so please continue.
No, I mean, I liked her. I can't remember, I've never watched this particular movie of hers before. But I've never had anything negative to say about her. So all good, I guess.
Okay, great. Sister, any further Winona thoughts?
I really love her in The Age of Innocence. And
okay, never seen it.
Love her in Dracula. I like the period pieces. I mean, she's lovely. I mean, I also like Little Women.
Yeah, Little Women. I'll tell you what, I've never seen that either, but I will say in the peak of my Winona forever fandom, if you will, admiration, if you will, I did admire her picture on the VHS box of she just looks really good on the spine. Like, it's a really good picture of her. Like, God damn, she's so
I feel like that's what I remember her from. Little Women.
VHS
now that
box?
she said
Little Women. Okay.
Yeah.
And of course, Beetlejuice. And
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like,
Hands. I mean,
Yeah.
Heather's.
Edward Scissorhands. Yes.
Yeah, sure.
right. I mean, she has a huge, and I love her in, like Stranger Things, and I loved her in Black Swan. Like I'm happy to watch Winona anytime. I'm even like, I think like American Quilt or whatever, which is some other 90s one that she was like writing her dissertation on quilt making.
Never saw it, but that sounds right. Listen, I would like to extend her a Wincott, if I might. I don't know if it's cool with you guys, but I think
Winona.
Yeah. It's a Wincott turned Winona. Hey, Winona, you are welcome on to Old Movie Time Machine, Oops All 90s, whenever you like. Just shoot us an email, partyline@oldmovietimemachine.com, and we will arrange that, and it'll be a good time. And today we're talking about a touchstone film for her called Reality Bites, which is sort of sold itself as representing the voice of these times, the Generation X, if you will, without actually saying Generation X, because there was another movie called Singles that had come out that didn't do very well. So the studios were like, maybe just lay off the Generation X aspect and just take everything from Generation X and put it into this movie, and we'll kind of try to repackage it so it's less aggressively Gen X. We'll try to make this thing 4-quadrant here. To mixed results, I guess. This movie did make money. It is considered technically a hit. But I will say, while time may have muddied the waters as to where we stand with this movie, because nowadays, I think I guess it's 30 years later. Exactly. 30 years later. Shit. Now this is seen as sort of like a representative film from that time. And I'm here to tell you guys, as somebody who lived through that time, even back then, everybody knew this movie sucked. Everybody knew this movie was lame and was trying to capture something that could not be captured in this format. But we're going to talk about it, starting with this thing I've been mentioning about integrity and street credibility. And what I'd like to do now is read a short passage to you guys, because I found all of my thoughts neatly summarized here through the words of somebody else. There's a guy called Chuck Klosterman you may or may not have heard of. He's an author. He's sort of a cultural philosopher and critic, and he's also written some fiction as well, but he's a very smart guy, and he's one of the great representatives in the literary world of Generation X. So he wrote a book that came out a few years ago called The 90s, that's just about the 90s. And so as I'm watching this, I'm like, oh yeah, he wrote about this. And he's actually done some podcasts about Reality Bites and what it represents and everything. But you may notice, having watched this movie now, that there's a lot of talk of this concept of selling out. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So here's what Chuck has to say. Let's summarize this, because this is what I've been trying to relay to you guys who are a few years younger than me and kind of missed this whole phase. But this informs everything, okay?
I'm here to sell out.
Okay. Exactly right. That selling out is cool now. But here's the deal. The concept of selling out and the degree to which that notion altered the meaning and perception of almost everything is the single most 90s aspect of the 90s. The complexity, nuance, and application of the term sellout was both ubiquitous and impossible to grasp. Nothing was more inadvertently detrimental to the Gen X psyche.
Oh, so my then he God. Goes in 100%. Amen. Preaching to the choir.
You understand what I'm saying?
Oh, God. Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay, well, how do you interpret this then? Tell me about it.
So these are the things that I personally find really, like, I remember being annoyed by this in the 90s. Like, friends, can you just make a fucking decision? No, you can't, because you can't sell out. So you can't make a decision, Ross and Rachel. They
were on a break.
Hate the musical Rent. Which the real world, I mean, let's talk about it. Like, all the 90s things of this sellout culture, or anti-sellout culture, I should say. Like, no, okay? I don't think being a starving artist is not cool. Pay your fucking rent, bitches.
Yeah.
Idiots. Oh my God.
Well, this has always been the critical aspect, is can you pay the rent without compromising your values? Now, some people just need to pay the rent, right? Most of us just want to pay the rent.
Right.
And most people don't have values. You know,
but I was going to say, what are these values that are precluding you from paying the rent, I guess, is the thing. Like being a responsible human being is like covering your own fucking bills.
I have the answer right here. So Klosterman goes on. He gives you the rundown of like the history, the semiotic usage of the term sellout, dating back to the Dylan selling out the folk scene, and then the Who releases a record called The Who Sellout. Like people knew what selling out was in the 60s.
So
it's really a music thing.
No, so I was going to say, if you had to define, based on what you guys have read and said, if you had to define sellout, what would that be?
So by 2010, it was hard to illustrate to a young person why this act was once seen as problematic. By 2020, it was difficult to explain what the term literally expressed. But its usage and centrality peaked at the onset of the 90s. Now, what made selling out so psychologically vexing was the level of gradation inherent to its principles. It did not simply mean someone was trying to sell something in order to get rich. It meant someone was compromising the values they originally espoused in exchange for something superficial, which was usually money, but not necessarily. Sometimes it's fame or popularity or something like that. This action was particularly bad if the compromised person was still doing the same work they'd done before, except now packaging that work in an attempt to make it palatable to a less discriminating audience. So you're taking this thing, whatever your work is, and you're trying to fit it for commerce, essentially. It's this forever battle between art and commerce, but not necessarily art. It's just like ideals, your code, right?
It could be an academic ideal. It could be, I'm guessing this movie does her documentary. I don't want to devalue that. Sorry. Her documentary that she's making is then turned into the real world or reality bites for the average consumer versus whatever Tribeca Film Festival she wanted to put that shit in.
So all of this can kind of conclude with, since the intent mattered more than the result, the success of the attempt was almost irrelevant. Selling out and failing was no better or worse than selling out and succeeding. So that's my reading. We're done with that for right now. Congratulations. You've made it through the reading. But does this clarify anything, this concept for you? Because he's telling us right now, like in those words, that it's a concept, but it's an abstract concept and it's really hard to wrap your arms around. It's very slippery. And the reason I'm always talking about music is because this was most easily represented by music. These 3-minute pop songs, these groups of guys who pride themselves, or women as well, please. In priding themselves in not selling out. I'm not going to take the curse word out of my lyrics just so it can be on the radio. This is this is my work. This is how I have expressed myself. I have chosen the word fuck to put here, and I'm not going to take it out. And if I take it out, that's me compromising my product. Yeah,
I'm definitely not taking the fucks out of what I say.
Well, nowadays you don't really need to, is the thing. I mean, that's the great thing is, we have progressed in a way to where a lot of those rules are not as stringent as they once were, just socially, and the levers of power and like the FCC and all that. Like there are other outlets. Whereas before, like during the time of this movie, 1994, the internet is basically television. So we're seeing the same impact, cable television as represented in this movie, serve the same function, but less efficiently as the internet, basically.
Yeah. And as a streaming service, I mean, they called it it's the post-network fractured viewing era or audience era, meaning like cable television came in and the rules that applied to network TV, where it was like, every show must be like a guest in someone's home and not be offensive and not be blah, blah, blah. And not, even though they were offensive in the time period. Cable allowed for more. And then, yes, the streaming services are the latest version.
And that's all courtesy of the interwebs, right? So this is a movie firmly placed pre-internet. We're not seeing any computers here, really. It's amazing to see Ben Stiller with a cell phone. Like I was kind of shocked to see it, and think about how what that represents, especially in 1994. If you had a cell phone in 1994, and everybody in this room has a phone in their pocket 24/7, right? If you had one in 94, you're a fucking douchebag, right? And the dog agrees with me. Like you're an asshole. Like who do you think you are? You are so important that you need to be available to have access to call anybody at any time. Very unhinged, very un-90s. And now here we are. It's 2024. We can't live without it.
Can't live without it.
Can't live without it. So before we get into like the plot mechanics of this movie, which are slim to none, Shrishma Naik, you did not grow up in the United States in the 1990s. This concept of selling out, do you recognize it in any kind of cultural sense? And as I explain the meaning, quote unquote, behind it, does it make any sense to you? And while you think about that, I will follow up by just saying that ultimately this mindset proved to be the exception and not the rule, because Carolyn, as you've already put it, nobody cares anymore and everybody is ready to sell out if you give me that money.
I have other thoughts about it, but Shrishma, you go.
Well, I was just thinking about it as you were describing, and this is my opinion. I might be wrong, so maybe listeners can email to correct me. But we were in Malaysia, and we were Indian, so I think this was again like parts of the world that were newly independent from the British colonizers. So I feel like the term sellout at that point kind of referred to an allegiance to, they're, if people were, fair skinned or they more showed preferential treatment to white people versus, us. So that was kind of like, that was more looked down upon. So like, don't sell out by giving in to the Western world, stay true to your roots. And so we grew up, my parents were, really try to push our traditions and the Indian tradition on us. And we went to international school. So it was always this battle against the Western world ways and ways of thoughts versus us growing up and staying true to our Indian roots. And so we would visit our family back home in India. So like if we spoke differently, they're from like, that was more of the sellout, I would say. Than how you've described it. We're just like, giving the middle finger to the man, if you will. Like, right.
But, okay.
Kind of, I think.
A little bit. I will say, I what you just described, like I recognize as selling out the way that I recognize 90s sellout. I mean, it is, I think, the same thing. And I think it probably has the same inherent flaws, which is there's some, in your situation, eventually you realize like, well, there is some benefit to having aspects of the Western world in my life. Like I like this part of this and I like this. So while I want to, hold on to my cultural identity to some degree, like I don't want to be cut off from this other thing. Same thing could be applied in the 90s where it's like, well, there are other things, mass commerce and, these big money machine productions can produce things that are worthwhile and stand the test of time and still move people. It might be more rare than, coming from a purely artistic, expressive background or whatever, but it can be done. Like you can mix the two things successfully. We see it happen. And so it's really hard to be super firm in your dogma when there are these sort of cracks of light, because even punk rockers have fucking cell phones now. Sorry.
Exactly.
Anyway, Carolyn, what do you got to say about it?
To Shrishma's point, I was just going to say, like, to a certain extent, I think just even the concept of like a sellout, which, you could, is a little bit of a white male perspective, in terms of like holding to their ideals, as in like, you're going to make personal sacrifices to stand by your values, right? So whether that's like Revolutionary War person saying like, I'm not going to sell out and like, not drink my whatever, I'm not going to sell out to the British Empire, right? Something like that. we could take it all the way back to that, or something like in India, same thing, where it's like, I'm going to stand by my cultural values.
Right.
That is a little bit, just maybe I would say like not even white male, but male dominated. Because to a certain extent, then I also feel like, what about the part of you that wants to feel safe?
Right.
And sometimes that safety comes in accepting some of the mainstream things and using them to your advantage. And I think like as a woman, I'm just sort of like, I want to be safe and comfortable. Like, I don't want to not be able to pay my mortgage. And I use like Rent as that is like such a 90s musical, and they're all like in that building not paying their rent because they don't want to, sell out or sacrifice their artistic values. And I'm like, yeah, but like, don't you want to have food?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
What are the values you're protecting, which include you not having to, something as basic as paying for where you stay? Like, do you believe like everyone's like no one should own land? Is that what the belief is that you're standing by? Because what is it that we're taking a stand against?
Well, this is where a lot of that alternative culture dogma does kind of fall apart, because
especially in the 90s.
Well, I mean, and especially seen through contemporary eyes. It's just this. If you look at your junior, I'm going to use just from my experience anyway, junior punk rocker, we're in bands. We're trying to, we're antisocial. We're anti-society. We believe society is inherently corrupt, and we're trying to create our own, new way of living in a, communal sense where we all are aligned to the same principles. And that's our society, which is, how much different is that from fucking, Waco compound or something like that? It's people trying to do their own thing, live by their own principles or whatever. But ultimately, somebody's got to pay rent. I mean, there isn't a place on the planet where you can go and set up shop unless you're going to the middle of the woods. And even then, it's probably illegal. Somebody needs to put a roof over your head. Somebody needs to feed you. And so if you're really true to those principles, that means you live on the streets. That means that you've made the decision that like, this is how I'm doing this. If I don't have a skill to ply, if I can't be an artist and sell my paintings, if I can't sell my expression and I'm holding true to my expression, then I must go beg people, So then you're relying on the good graces of people who did subscribe to the system and are working within it and have the money to give to you while you sit on the corner, So it's like this big cycle of nowhere. Right. It's why it's really hard to adopt as this like full on mantra for a way of life, because there are practicalities, as you realize when you become an adult, that need to be addressed, and they can only be addressed through having money to pay the guy who takes care of that thing and does this. So it's an incredibly flawed system.
Love is gonna pay our bills. That is what the end of this movie teaches us, is that love is gonna pay.
Which is the biggest lie of the 90s.
Like, what?
So, and Carolyn, I want to real quick before we move on from this part of the conversation, I wanted to address I get what you're saying, and look, the males are forever. We're always going to come from an elevated level of privilege. But I will say, maybe we need to more isolate this to just white people, because there's certainly plenty of white women who were in the same communities who were espousing the same thing, and I think they should be celebrated as much as the men. That's the only downside, is that people know the name Kurt Cobain, but they don't know the name Kathleen Hanna. And she's just as an important a figure from that time.
Abigail Adams was just as important as any of the founding fathers.
Exactly. And I'm not even going to throw out that behind every great man is a great woman. It's just people.
Behind every great woman is a dog that follows her to the bathroom.
But I do want to say,
4-3, it's fine.
Just as an initial comment on this movie, like, I feel like the career services at universities in the 90s weren't so great. Because if you're the valedictorian of your university, like, I feel like, you should have had some, like, better jobs lined up. I just feel.
Or does it illustrate how useless
your college degree is?
Aspect of your education is, where it's like you're worried about grades, and then you get out there and people are like, I don't know, what can you do for me right now? Okay, so the time is 1994. The space is Texas. Now, Houston or Dallas? I can't remember. Shrishma,
I think it's Houston.
Did you see this and like automatically cozy up to it? You're like, oh yeah, Texas. I know this.
Actually, I did not. I feel like it took me a while to realize they were. But I mean, and she said it right. We're in Houston.
Yeah, but they shot most of it in LA, so that makes sense. Yeah. So
I think this is a skyline shot that I did not recognize to be Dallas. But it was also the 90s Dallas skyline, so I only know it post 2000.
Are you talking about the one at the end, the very end, when they're standing outside the house and it's
there's one in the beginning somewhere as well.
Oh, okay. I did see in the credits that there was some kind of matte painting that got a shout out. So somebody put in a painting in the background of the city skyline at some point. But so this is the story of some early 20-somethings out in the world, fresh out of college, just trying to make their way in the world without selling out. Even though Winona has already signed on for the local television morning show and all this, but Troy Dyer, the rock and roll philosopher who gets fired for stealing a Snickers bar at the newsstand he works at, he's not selling out. He's got philosophies on top of philosophies to wrap around you until you're just like, just take the candy bar, dude. I don't want to listen to you talk anymore. He is super obnoxious. We also have Vicky, played by Janeane Garofalo. Now, did you recognize Janeane Garofalo? She's the one. This is the one who works at the Gap. Okay,
yes.
So
I mean, I know who Janeane Garofalo is.
Right. And she's a very important figure culturally in the world of alternative underground comedy. So we all know her now, but back in the day before she was famous, it was a group of comedians that you would all recognize now, all working together and doing shows. And she, according to Bob Odenkirk, who was another one of those people from that time, who plays, of course, Saul on Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, and created Mr. Show with David Cross, which is a sort of legendary fixture of the comedy world. David Cross was part of this group too. They all say that Janeane was the one, like the center of that scene. She was the one who was in charge and supported people, and none of that stuff, none of them would have done anything without her support, basically. So to give you guys the rundown on how this kind of like the connections here. So this movie is directed by Ben Stiller, right? Yeah. Ben Stiller at this time.
He looked really good too.
He's very young, right? This is
very young. I haven't seen him that young.
It's early Stiller. So this is coming off of he had a television show on MTV. You may or may not know, in the early 90s called The Ben Stiller Show. And this is where all these people kind of come together professionally for the first time. So on this writing staff, it's Ben Stiller, Janeane Garofalo, Andy Dick, who you would know from News Radio and some other movies. He's in this movie too. David Cross, Bob Odenkirk, and a couple of writers who continue to work today and have written things that you would have heard of. But they all meet while making this show, which is canceled after, I can't remember how many episodes, 10 episodes or something like that. But it's like a sketch comedy show based around Ben Stiller, who is known for doing impressions of people. It has his unique comedic take on things. So this is the first expression of his voice and the first time all these people get together to work. So that's how they all end up when he gets this script and is asked to direct it. That's why all these people start getting involved in it who come from that world. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of nice to see, like, from a historical perspective, it's nice to see these people as young people doing their early work. Yeah. When we know that they're going to do other great work later on down the line. But it's nice to see them as kids, because we were all that age at one point. So this movie was written by a woman who did like 77 drafts of this movie or something like that. It was written and rewritten and rewritten. And she bases it off of her own life experiences as a Gen Xer, going through these same experiences, which I feel like are pretty universal, maybe. I mean, I certainly had experiences similar to this. What about you guys? I mean, I feel like this is independent of Gen X in the 90s. Like, this is a phase when you're becoming an adult and like learning how to adult, basically.
It's a life stage for sure. And I think a lot of it is, just that age of like post-college, your friends, instead of kind of being thrown together with the common goal of like school, you're all kind of off needing to do your own things to satisfy whatever you need to be doing to just make a life for yourself. And, it's like everyone's falling in and out of love, and some people are getting married and having kids. And then other people are like, I am just legit trying to figure out how to pay my bills.
Right.
It's like, that's a hard thing with your 20s. And I think that is certainly not attached to any one generation. I think that's just your 20s.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, exactly. So this is just a representation of that time period in a person's life. And I guess what makes it the selloutness, the question of selling out and all this, which is not, it's not directly addressed. And just like they don't say Gen X, we're not talking about the sellout question directly, but it is, everything they're talking about is about that and being true to yourself and where do you fit in this world. And, so when Winona's character, Lelena, who works for Marty from Frasier's dad, who is incredible, lovely.
He seems like a real peach.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's the actor is incredible, but this character he plays here is hideous, of course. But she gets herself fired and finds herself needing to pay the rent. I mean, her name's on the lease and shit. I mean, I was just there recently. It's awful, an awful experience. So she needs to come to terms with how she's going to do that. And we see her go through this process of rejecting Vicky's proposal, which is, and Vicky has to live in reality, right? Vicky has accepted that, look, I'm not sure what I'm all about. That's the sense I get from Vicky, is that she's just kind of...
She's kind of doing stuff.
She's not like proactively seeking her identity, but she's just fully herself. And she likes to, fuck strange dudes and sort of be nostalgic about the 1970s, during which time she would have been a kid. And this is kind of the start of nostalgia in a modern sense.
Yeah, I feel like this is a very clear, like, she has understood, and like, this is the generation that has grown up with media in their lives, right? Like film, television, whatever. That she's like, I'm not ingenue material.
Right.
I'm supporting actress material, which means I got to be practical. I got to go work at the Gap.
Right.
Like, my looks and my intelligence are not going to, like, I'm not the Winona.
Yeah, it's funny. So I was reading some articles with Janine talking about this movie, and I thought I had no idea, but her whole take on this is that she had a really hard time identifying with these characters, because when this movie is being made, she's 29 years old. She's like, technically, I was at the end of the baby boom, so I'm not even Gen X. I was playing 21 at age 29. So that was very surprising. And also, I mean, she definitely, in her own personal career, she had done a couple of like very bit parts in random movies, and was doing stand up and just trying to like break into the industry. And so it was kind of a big deal for her to get this type of role. And she has a very funny story about her dad coming to the set to like watch the filming, getting super bored, and then briefly talking to Winona Ryder and being surprised to learn that was Winona Ryder. And he went to her later and was like, so that little girl is a movie star? That's such a dad thing to say. Very dad. Hey, speaking of dads, did you recognize Dad in this movie, Carolyn?
No.
Jodan Baker, a.k.a. Mitchell, plays Winona's dad, the guy with the gas card.
Oh. Okay.
Yes. So we see the parents, and these are classic parent archetypes, right?
Yeah.
Where, I mean, first of all, they're classic 90s parent archetypes, because we got divorced. Yep. We got divided homes. So, I mean, they're putting that right out there on the billboard of like, look, this is speaking to your generation. Because for people who wouldn't know, like, let's say we gather a younger crowd here. Let's say our quest for relevance works and we get some kids in here. They need to understand that getting divorced was not a thing people fucking did until...
But they should have.
Late 70s, 80s kind of thing. I mean, it's rare. Our grandparents, Carolyn and I, our grandparents divorced, and it was wild.
Big
news. It was earth-shattering. Yeah, I mean, it was like... not something that happened very often. So this does start to normalize throughout the 1980s, and we're seeing the result in this movie of all these sort of displaced latchkey kids who probably had to grow up in two houses and maybe have two Christmases or be shuffled from one house to the other, or, it's a two-income household all of a sudden, or, mom's got to work to sustain her life and dad works to sustain his life. So now it's a generation of kids spending a lot of time by themselves in a way that probably doesn't exist very much nowadays. Yes, Carolyn.
Well, I was going to say, not only are they spending a lot of time by themselves, but so much is marketed to them at this particular time period in terms of like consumerism.
Yes.
Cereals, toys, even MTV to like the older set with like music but like so much of it's more like, hey, this is a market. So not only are these kids just, got daddy's gas card, they're also being marketed to.
They were always marketed to, but at this point, it is so brutally efficient and so effective because, if you want to hear us talk about this more, you should check out our other program. It's called Good Advice, where we look back at old television commercials. It's out on the internet. You can, wherever you get your podcasts, go check it out. We've talked about this at length. How indistinct commercials become from the actual programming. They kind of become one and the same. You watch a Lucky Charms commercial and you're like, is this a cartoon show or are they selling me cereal? And the answer is it's both. So they got really good at this. You're absolutely right. And here's my question about this movie, and this is why I wanted to research a little bit, and I can't really find an answer, is this movie seems self-aware about that. The fact that, it wears it on its sleeve that all these characters grew up with all of these fucking dumb cereal commercials, because every line that comes out of Troy Dyer's mouth is a quote from one of these commercials. I'm bursting with fruit flavor and, all of this stuff. And he's saying it sarcastically. So it's like, okay, so the filmmakers are aware that these characters are so hip and savvy that they recognize how they've been polluted by this level of commerce. However, at the same time, Troy Dyer's holding a fucking can of Pringles with the leg, specifically pointed at the camera. And there's another can of Pringles on top of the fridge on the other side of the frame. It's like, okay, so you got money from Pringles then. And then that gets tied into the whole idea of selling out. How pure is this message if you had to go to Pizza Hut, which is a joke in the movie, but at the same time, they still had to go to Pizza Hut and get the rights to use the Pizza Hut, Yes, Shrishma, what do you got?
To me, this sounds insanely familiar description when we talked about Barbie. Because
yes, exactly. I thought the same thing.
It's the same kind of...
The conundrum.
Right, exactly. Because you're trying to sell a message in, using a vehicle that's completely sold out. And its only mission is to increase sales for Mattel.
Right.
So
right. We're trying to make our movie filled with characters espousing anti-corporate messages, but at the same time, we can only afford to do that if we have Winona Ryder holding a Big Gulp cup with the 7-Eleven logo pointed right at the barrel of the camera. It's insanity, but so this becomes how do we weigh the efficacy of this message and the story that's being told? Is this an appropriate vehicle for the sellout conversation to be had? Or is this the most corrupt vehicle for the sellout? Because they had to sell out to get the message out. It's so crazy, right? And this is where selling out this is where Klosterman's talking about the gradation of like, well, where does it begin and where does it end? And how do we actually gauge this? And if we all end up on the street asking people for money, people who have real jobs and did decide to operate within the matrix of society, then how good is this system? Where does this leave you? Where does Troy Dyer end up at the end of it all with his philosophy degree and his varied CV of 12 jobs he's been fired from, 12 shitty jobs he's been fired from, where they're low stakes jobs working at a grocery store.
I feel like if I had to predict their love story, they probably get married and then have a kid, and then that kind of brings them on track. Or it doesn't.
Yeah, or they divorce, they have the kid, and she realizes, oh yeah, this burnout is not father material.
Yeah, I mean, so this is, I guess, when I was saying like about that need for safety, like, you know, what happens in this particular stage when you're not having to think about anyone but yourself, your needs are a little bit different. The demands aren't as high, but as soon as you get that like parenting instinct or you have a kid, then your needs change because one, parenting is the toughest job in the world. Yeah. And that's just like whether you have money or don't have money, it's the toughest job in the world. But one of the things you don't want to worry about is just like having your basic needs met when you are parenting. Like that's a worry that you just don't want to have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where we see, yes, if they got married and popped out a kid, they would have been divorced. She would have been like, you know what? Your values are not putting a roof over our child's head or food in their mouth.
Right. I mean, it's such a catch-22 because it's like, man, you know, we love the values, have a code. But also you got to take care of yourself. Like you have to, and if you have a kid, you got to, you know, baby comes first, right? You got to take care of baby. Baby's number one in that case. Like it's no longer about you and your ego and your sense of selling. It's just like, we got to take care of this kid and raise this kid the best way we possibly can. So yeah, again, another example of it's a young person's game, this whole concept, and why it hasn't really lasted. And yet, like Klosterman points out, this warped the sensibilities of a generation, myself included. And I've been trying to deal with it ever since then to varying degrees of success. But at this point, at least I can recognize that when I see Janelle Monáe, who I think is one of the great artists of our times, when I see her doing a Target commercial, that doesn't mean I no longer would think that she's compromised her art by using Target. She's using Target as the distribution platform in a world where there is no longer a music industry like there used to be to distribute her beautiful art, you know? So you kind of have to mellow at a certain point on how strict you're going to be with these things. Oh, we haven't talked about Steve Zahn is in this movie as well. So we're seeing...
I'm guessing there was a lot of his that was cut.
Yeah. So what happened? And Steve plays a character called Sammy, who is he's a gay character, and he's trying to come out to his parents. So I guess the original script was much heavier on Vicky's storyline and Sammy's. Like everybody had a complete story arc.
Okay.
And just for the sake of we need to just get this made and keep it 90 minutes, they kind of trimmed a lot of that back. It was just it's a creative decision that had to be made.
And realized that people are only going to go see this film because Winona Ryder's in it.
Well, that's a huge part of it. She gets the movie made. It would not have been funded. Now, then again, I come back to the self-awareness with the product placement, because I looked up the budget of this movie. It was $11.5 million, which seems like a lot of money.
Where did that?
Where?
On a contemporary film where they legit shopped at the Gap. The hair was shit. There was like no makeup involved. I mean, the hair was greasy. It was like spot on with the 90s. Don't get me wrong. But like all those actors fucking rolled out of bed and showed up on set, and they were like, all right, cool. There was no hair, makeup, costume people for this. Who are they paying? What was that craft service like?
It's a great question, because my thought as I looked that up and I'm watching the movie, I'm like looking at my phone and then looking at
how much did Ben Stiller get paid?
Well, I have to imagine that it's a Winona. Probably Winona got the lion's share of that funding. But my question was like, wait a minute. So this whole movie takes place in their living room, this television studio, and that coffee house where the band play. You know, like for the most part, right. We're not building we're not building ancient Rome over here. You know, like what? And the shooting took, I think, 42 days. 42 days. I mean, look, we're shooting on film. Like nowadays, if you're shooting a digital video, this would be done in a weekend. You know, this type of movie. Like,
right.
So it does seem. I don't know. I'm trying to wrap my brain around like where did the time and money go to in this very. It's well made. Ben Stiller knows how to direct. I mean, but
$11 million.
Yeah.
That's a lot of
in 1995 money.
93.
90. Oh, God. Can we even look up what that is today?
Probably, yeah.
11 million.
I'm going to guess 25 million, maybe?
1993.
Maybe less. Maybe 20. 23?
23 million.
Okay.
23
that
million.
makes more sense. That
Yeah.
still seems like...
It still
seems too much for this
For a
movie.
lot of footage of people sitting on couches, getting high, talking to each other.
Maybe it
that
was the
seems like a
weed
lot
they
of
had
money.
to buy.
That actually makes
Could
me
be.
hate this movie even more than I already do. And this is nothing about like camera usage or anything else like that. Like Ben Stiller, I'm not coming at you. It's just more like, ugh. But seriously, $11 million in 1993 money to look at Ethan Hawke's greasy fucking hair.
Through VHS, no less. Half the movies in VHS.
In VHS, where everyone's like blown out, you can't tell facial features. Like, no, what were they doing?
So we're talking about, at this point, Winona Ryder's character, Lelena, her whole thing is she is a documentarian. So she comes from art school, got herself a, liberal arts degree of some manner. Carolyn, you and I both know this all too well, how this works, right? It's probably not the best option if you are a true artist to go this route, but it's what society was prescribing at the time. So she has been filming her friends as they cope with their early 20s. And by filming, I mean she's been running a video camera.
Did anyone sign like, a contract for this or like,
I mean,
you know what I mean? Where I'm like,
yeah.
I'm looking at this like from a legal perspective. Like, did she get them all to sign off and like, yes, you can use my footage in your documentary? Like, no, she just started doing it.
Well, technically, he took the tapes without telling her, and so I'm sure they would have figured that out. But the idea is that she's been documenting them and their struggles. So Vicky and her career path at the Gap, and Sammy's going to come out to his parents or his mom, tell her that he's gay. And Troy, the band dude, and what band life is like in the early 90s. And she's doing basically, Carolyn, you already mentioned it, The Real World, which was coming out at the same time that this movie was, it had come out 3 years before, I think, 91, I want to say, was when
92.
Real World started. 92, okay. And Shrishma, do you know The Real World?
Yes. What do you mean?
Well, I'm asking because, like, while it's an entity nowadays, back in the early 90s, it was the entity. Like, it was so fresh and new. And by the time you get to season 3, San Francisco, I mean, it was really high drama and really meaningful as reality television. And they call it, what do they call it? Real TV programming in this movie? Like when Ben Stiller's introducing her show, he's like,
go ahead, finish. Sorry.
well, I'm just saying that like that was all new and now it's the standard. It's like this is the cheap way to produce content is we just get a bunch of assholes together and have them drink some wine and see what happens, and like put in some bleeps before commercial breaks and there we go. We got a show.
Was Real World the first kind of reality show out there?
I don't know about the first in general, but I will say it was definitely seen as the first important type of reality-based television. I think it sort of opened the door for that to become more of a thing. And we saw that happen more and more throughout the 90s and really has kind of exploded around 2000, I would say, with like, Survivor and, shows like Blind Date or Fifth Wheel. That becomes reality
American
programming.
Idol.
American Idol. Yes, exactly. Right. We're taking
And then
real
Paris
people and-
Hilton has her show.
Yes. Yeah. The Simple Life, right? With Nicole. Yeah. So she is shooting this documentary. There was one article I read, I think it was from Jezebel maybe, where they point out that there's the scene, it's towards the end of the movie when she's really sad about how they've butchered her edit and everything. And she's talking about, I worked so hard on it, And the writer was questioning like, yeah, did you? Because it looks like you just kind of rolled tape on your friends talking. And that's about it. Like, did you work hard on it? Do you know what it means to work hard? 21-year-old Lelena from Reality Bites or 23-year-old Lelena? It's a very early 20s point of view is what we will say.
Yeah, I mean, if they'd showed her editing or something else, like actually doing the work of something with film, I would believe it more. But instead, it's like, I think you just gave your boyfriend some VHS tapes of your friends.
Yes. So otherwise, the other characters, let's talk signs of the times. So we have Vicky, who works at the Gap, right? And she has had to sell out to some degree to get her managerial position, but it helps everybody because she can pay the rent and buy groceries and everything. So again, the conundrums are multitudinous at this point. Also, because she is an empowered woman, independent woman, and owns her sexuality, she sleeps with a bunch of dudes, and this leads to her having to take an HIV or AIDS test at the local clinic. This is a very 90s thing. We're starting to, guys, let's talk about sex. You know, Salt and Pepper, they put it right out there. Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me in this clinic and how we got to go make sure our shit is clean. And so we get to see that. So that is, I don't know if that's the first time we would see that in mainstream media, but it's certainly a big example of seeing this early in mainstream media. Also, Steve Zahn's character's gayness, I think that's probably still kind of novel at this point in the early 90s. Like, you know, we've talked about this before, like the homophobia that's still like, runs rampant all the way up to the early aughts, mid-aughts maybe. And so it's sort of a bold move to have a character, you know, embrace a character without the stereotypes that we would traditionally associate that would also be used in a detrimental way. So that's progressive, I would say. It's a good thing that comes out of this. And then we have Troy, of course, and his burnout philosophy. How do you guys, I'm going to ask you two adult women, between Michael, played by Ben Stiller, and Troy, who do you go with? Who do you run with if you're Lelaine? They both treat her as an object to be won over, by the way. They both treat her as a prize to be won, and she has like zero agency in their dynamic, so that's probably.
And her only choice is to choose one of them versus I'd be like, fuck you, motherfucker.
Exactly. So that is, you know, we have made progress, I think, in at least identifying that as an issue. I think we still see that dynamic all over the place.
But yeah, I mean, if I had to choose between the two, I'd obviously go with the slightly older gentleman who has a job and a career and tells me that I'm intelligent and have worth, and that my work is important.
That's a great point. I mean, Michael is a very interesting character.
He's not an asshole.
Well, he's hard to define, I think. He doesn't fit a stereotype that I can see. Like, okay, so he has sold out according to the mores of these our protagonists because he has a job, because he answers to the man, and because he works for cable television, which at that point is, like I say, like the internet, has the same level of influence, and that he represents, therefore, being part of the apparatus. You know, like all of the bullshit machine that feeds you these Captain Crunch commercials. And all of the, you know, the commercial aspects of like, you are not complete unless you have Pizza Hut in your life. And, you know, like that's their message as young people, young idealists. Yeah, me too. Pizza sounds great right now. But he represents that. But at the same time, he recognizes the value in Lelena's work and her voice. And even though he is a few years older than her, like he sees, well, I mean, first and foremost, he sees that she is Winona Ryder and she is so cute. But also he sees that she has something to say and he wants to platform her. He wants to use his access to the machine to platform this voice. Now it goes haywire because the machine ultimately takes its revenge by giving it a bad edit and putting a bunch of Pizza Hut endorsements in it and all of this. So like that's the cautionary part of this tale, which is
but then he also goes back and says,
I want to fix it.
I'm so sorry. I want to fix it. Let's make it the way that you want it to be. And let's go have all those meetings. Like, he doesn't just say, like, it's this way or the highway. He really, like, I don't understand why she's chasing after fucking burnout boy over there who runs away from his problems, is not responsible whatsoever, hasn't paid rent in I don't know how long. I would just be like, I don't care if you think he's that, because he's not that cute. Sorry. I'm just kind of like, what is the attraction? What is the attraction here?
I also think like,
and love is not
Ethan Hawke's character would probably like make her feel guilty for succeeding because he won't see the same
course.
level of success. Whereas like Ben Stiller is kind of trying to like, make her grow and like supporting her success.
Right.
And so she still chooses.
The guy who's going to act like a jealous boyfriend anytime she gets any attention, which she will because she's Winona Ryder. And so, he's just going to end up belittling her and making her feel worthless so that he can feel like he has the power in the situation when, dude, you don't have the power.
Yeah. Because on one hand, I can feel Troy a little bit when it's the two of them walking through town and they're having their cigarettes and they're drinking their cup of coffee and having a nice conversation. Like, part of me is like, yeah, that is what it's all about. That is what connection is. And then we cut to him at his club with his 90s band, and he's like dedicating songs to her and singing at her. And that's kind of my favorite. Like, I think it's the funniest part of this fucking movie is how disgusted she gets when he sings his awful lyrics at her and she like storms out of the club. Like, there's nothing more early 90s than that scene.
Yeah,
because so fucking stupid.
I mean, even our early social media posts as millennials were like, here's some random song lyrics.
Yes.
This is my mood.
Right. Yes, mood. My mood is, can I get just one kiss? And then cut to Winona like shaking her head in disgust. I can't believe you're up there singing a song about trying to kiss me. You are unbelievable, Troy Dyer. Like, none of it makes any fucking sense.
No. And I also feel like Winona knows that because none of those scenes are believable. Like, her she's trying her best to act her way through those this terrible scene dynamic, and it does not work. Like, I'm just like, this is not this. There's nothing like grounded in any kind of realism.
The wheels really fly off for me when it's after he disappears and she starts seeing him in different places. She starts seeing other grunge boys and mistakes them for her grunge boy. Like, then it's like, oh my God, you need a life. Which her roommates actually present this to her. We've got to talk. You need to get a fucking life.
Yes.
Now, I think that's an interesting scene because that would probably never happen in real life. I mean, I've had roommate situations like this where definitely roommates should have sat me down and had that conversation, and I should have sat roommates down and had that conversation with them. But the reality is that's never going to happen because you're an adult and you're making your own decisions to sink or swim. So we all need to respect that, I think, is how the ruling on that scenario goes in reality anyway. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I don't think that is gonna happen. I think everyone would sidestep around actually having that conversation.
I think on one hand, I mean, because we do see her doing these job interviews, right? She's going out talking to people. So it's not like she's not putting out the apps. If she's sitting on the phone, she's running up the phone bill. That's an issue, the phone bill. But we'll swing back to the phone in a second.
Oh my God, yeah.
But as long as she's putting out the apps, that's all you can really ask of a person, right? Like, she's trying. She's not just waiting for somebody to hand her the job. She's being very picky because she could be working at the Gap with her buddy, which could be kind of sweet, So go get high on the loading dock and fold some khakis. The Gap, by the way, represents all of the sellout of the early 90s. Very appropriate. And yet they still had to get the Gap permission to use their logo and their branding. So again, it's all a snake eating its tail sort of thing. There's no conclusion here. It's all built on very shaky ground. Let's talk about the phone bill real quick, because that is certainly a sign of the times. Worrying about the fucking phone bill? There's nothing more 90s than that, /80s, 70s, 60s, like this idea of the phone being a
their
utility. Their
phones were also on cords.
Yeah, attached
attached to
What area code are you calling? Is that a long distance call? Because that will cost me more than I need to worry about. Yeah.
Right.
So we don't have those worries in the same way.
And the fact that they had 4 human beings living in an apartment for 2, utilizing one phone.
Yeah. I feel like they didn't really exploit the Troy move-in as much as they could have. I feel like there should have been more roommate friction between all of them that wasn't really tapped into. So maybe that's in the extended script, I guess. But when she like stares at the couch and gets sad to not see Troy there, that feels unearned to me. Like, am I supposed to feel bad that he's like, I'm supposed to expect him there? Because I only saw him there for like one scene, and that was an hour ago. So I don't know what I'm supposed to make of that. Let's talk about the smoking. You know, it's one of the things.
Everyone's smoking.
Everyone's smoking. I love to see it. There's nothing. I mean, look, it's dirty and stinky and cancerous, but there's nothing wrong with it. Winona Ryder in 1994 smoking a cig. I mean, that's total dreamboat right there. Smoking inside. Everybody's smoking inside. You love to see that. Technology creep. We've already talked about it a little bit, but you know, we have phones. We see the cell phone. We don't really see computers outside of the television station and represent the machinery. But I don't know. I feel like we've tackled most of the big issues of Reality Bites. Has this movie / conversation lent you guys any insight into this sort of intangible of what we talk about, what people my age talk about when we talk about the 90s? What do you think now?
I mean, it's like a general malaise of the direction society is heading.
Which
the 90s are partially having an existential crisis.
Yeah, is that not so representative of the 90s, which are seen as, okay, if we want to line it up like politically and economically, at least in the United States, the 90s are actually politically a fairly decent time. You know, Bill Clinton, who is a problematic figure, I recognize that. But as far as peace and issues go, I'd rather have Bill Clinton in office than fucking Ronald Reagan, who let all this shit kind of decay in the way that it did. And also economically, it's a very prosperous time in the United States. It's a time of economic security. And so that makes this a unique window of time within a slightly larger post-war unique window of time of American affluence and success, which we're seeing start to fall apart here. We started in the 80s. We haven't really covered that time period. We're seeing the decay here a little bit in the 90s. I guess what I'm saying is these characters have the luxury to reflect and consider these things in a philosophical sense in a way that people Dust Bowl 1932 did not.
Right.
So,
yeah, and I guess that's really the perspective, maybe not male, maybe not female, but it's just a privileged perspective where it's like, you know, their basic needs have always been met, so they're not worried.
Now they have to worry about the higher needs, like more.
Right.
They have time and space to worry about, like, what are we doing here and what's my purpose?
Think about the luxury of everybody, including the burnout, has a college education. Even Troy, or Troy is 6 credits away from completing it. And he's just being stubborn and philosophical. And think of the luxury of even divorced parents handing you their gas card and saying, "Here you go." I mean, that
giving you their used car,
gesture.
Right?
Yeah,
giving you their old car, not used. But I think that this also signifies like the first generation where that undergraduate degree is like expected, and it's created an extended adolescence because of it. True. And like the millennials are definitely that next generation of like, oh yeah, our parents were sold that college degree hard.
Right. And that ends up being, we don't need to get into it here. Maybe this is more of a 2010s discussion, but it becomes clear that is also part of the machinery at work here that people start to bristle against. Like, it's a business. Higher education does go from being something noble and beneficial and essential to something that is essential, but is also very much a fucking business.
Overpriced.
Right. Yeah. So, and those tuitions can keep going up year after year, don't they? It's crazy. So I did want to give credit to this movie for at least broaching the issue of the intricacies of a gesture such as your parents trying to help you out when you're trying to get started or whatever. Yeah. You're just trying to break away and do things on your own terms. But when dad offers you access to the gas card or access to a used car, it's like, well, I'm going to say no based on my fucking principles. My principles don't pay my bills, but my job does. And my job is a 20-minute drive away from my house. So, yes, I will say yes to the car, even though this is not something that adheres to my code or whatever. So it doesn't necessarily make a complete statement on this topic, but it does bring it up. And I think that is noteworthy. So for all the flaws in this movie, it does at least try to kind of at least address or at least acknowledge the existence of these issues, whether or not it does make a statement on them one way or the other. Because I do feel like the ultimate message of this movie is very confused in a way that I think is probably, there's no way to make a conclusive statement on this mindset of selling out within the world of commerce and practical life skill. It's I've never seen it. If you guys have, please send it.
I think that's the point. The point is that it's not clear. Like, it was an abstract concept, and everyone applies it to their life in different ways. Like, she did it by taking help where she could get it to try and, everyone at the end wants to go somewhere or progress. Right. Troy did it by sticking to his principles, if you will, and then Ben Stiller's character kind of did it the conventional way. If you will. So, I think the whole point is, there was never there is no right or wrong in this. It's just how people kind of live their, how they choose to live their lives and make choices based on, what's best for them at a current time.
Absolutely.
In that way, the movie was, that's why I didn't mind it. I felt it aptly captured, the general confused state of mind of people at that age, that phase of life.
Right. Okay, great. So as we kind of wind down to our conclusion here, I'm going to ask you the final vital ultimate question in a second, but I do want to just sort of close out by saying, and we've already discussed this a little bit with the Can't Hardly Wait episode, but the wind leaves the sails of this mindset by around 96, 97. And, we've already talked about some of the factors that happen. Kurt Cobain blows his brains all over the place, effectively ending this sort of, he's a primary cultural figure, representation, avatar, whatever you want to say, of this mindset and these people. And he ends it by killing himself. And boy, that's not something that's translatable to an entire population of however big Generation X was, 40 million people or whatever. We can't all just go kill ourselves and that's how we deal with it. There has to be something. The hard part is continuing on. That's the tough decision to make, not ending it just to get out of the cycle, because you can't live with yourself, because you have to make basic decisions to function in a society and put food in your stomach, So, and then the rest of the cultural figures, they start to burn out or fade away, whether through drugs or just a general inability to grapple with their own success as this mindset is mainstreamed. Again, it's all these contradictions that sort of make it collapse in on itself. It's not sustainable. And while this was the mainstream for, let's say, the first 5 years of the 1990, 92 to 1997, we'll say that 5-year chunk, that is the mainstream. When it collapses in on itself, the people who drive that movement, then the mainstream abhors a vacuum. They're going to fill it with something, and they're going to fill it with fucking Gap pants, and they're going to fill it with all the outfits we saw in Can't Hardly Wait and the haircuts, and they're going to fill it with Dawson's Creek, which is these clean cut, healthy kids wearing fucking pants from the Gap, so on and so forth. And that's what has continued on to this day, because right around the corner from that is Britney, and then there's Christina, and then the Backstreet Boys, and this sort of prefabricated culture that just comes from these companies who have a bunch of money and control the delivery system, the distribution. They're the ones who have access to MTV. So you're going to see on MTV, not the heroin addict from Seattle. You're going to see the clean cut Britney Spears who came from, Disney Channel shows and knows how to play ball and knows that this is, we can put your art up there and we can let you sing and dance, but we're doing it because you will make us money, because you look like this and you're sounding the way that, most people want to hear a sound, that kind of thing. So just want to point that out, that this film represents that part of the 90s, but the back half of the 90s, which you guys are experts in, is going to be represented by what comes after, what fills the void after this is extinguished. It does become an extinct way of life. And the only remnants, the only fossils are motherfuckers like me and Chuck Klosterman and anybody who gave a shit about that stuff back in the day and has it hanging over our heads and has to ask the question of like, what's the integrity level of this thing I'm producing? All that shit. Because that shit doesn't pay the bills. At the end of the day, if you're lucky, being true to yourself will connect with enough people and who would be willing to give you money to continue doing it. But that's not across the board. So anyway, that's where we're going to leave this conversation. Shrishma Naik.
Yes.
1994's Ben Stiller's Winona Ryder's Reality Bites. Do we keep watching this thing?
Yeah, I think we do. I genuinely, I thought it was a decent movie. It's not selling, some unrealistic version of life. It's just, it's a slightly exaggerated version of what I think people still go through today. Like, what do I want to do with my life? Do I, go work at the store? Do I follow my dreams? Do I marry the rich guy? Do I marry like the one that I like? So there's so many like questions that we still ask today. And I think it's a fair, albeit white version of the
So
time.
white. Oh, I mean, let's
we didn't
call
even
that out.
talk
Like,
about the
So white.
is there a person of color in this movie?
diversity check.
I don't think so. I don't
Not one
remember.
that
Think of one.
immediately comes to my mind.
Yeah.
And I
So
don't
that's-
know if like Janine's character was supposed to be some form of like, of Hispanic descent, but I think she was generally white as well.
Yeah, I see it as white.
Yeah. So it was fine. I think it was a good movie.
Yes.
It's yes. Well, now that I made my own statement about the diversity part, I just started to question my position. But okay, we'll go with it. We'll stick with it.
Well, okay, let's talk about diversity in a gender sense. I mean, this is the star is a female, and we have and Janine is a primary supporting character, so it's in that way it's equitable. It's a bunch of white people, Shrishma. You can say it. It's what it is. Like that, and that is a problem because by 1994 we knew about diversity.
Problems.
Yeah.
I remember like saying like once I was like morality is kind of a luxury or a privilege. Like if you don't have food to eat the next day, what morals? Like
Right.
I guess that was my point as well. Where it's like, it's kind of it's just really a place of privilege to be like, yeah, you can't sell out. Well,
I'm hungry,
Glad you haven't figured it out, but yeah,
Right.
I got this bill to pay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a yes from you. Maybe a hesitant, like a mild with room to grow. Carolyn Naoroz, my sister and yours. What do you think? Do we keep watching this?
I'm gonna say yes as well, but I am saying yes because it's everything I hate about the 90s. Like it is, so therefore for me it's more like here is a time capsule of bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
So, and just to recap all the things you hate about the 90s, like give me the bullet list of those. What are those aspects again that turn you way the fuck off?
Motherfucking people just like standing by their morals and values, saying I don't want to, in their place of privilege, saying I don't need to pay rent. I mean, I'm sorry, just be a responsible adult human being. Yeah. That is what the age you are now at requires. Mm-hmm. And the rest of us don't need to take care of you. You need to take care of yourself.
Right. And I mean, if you can't do it, you got the Cobain route. That's the only option. What are we doing here? Like, you have to live.
Yeah.
Right.
And to live, you need food and shelter.
Right.
They're very basic things. And those things come at a price. So.
Right.
Unfortunately, I can't say that I agree with that. That's how it works, that you need to be, money kind of drives, us. That's a different discussion. But
exactly. Yes.
The world that we live in today works in certain ways. So if we want to have our basic needs met, we need to do certain things.
Yes. I mean, and again, the only way around this is if you find a plot of land that is not owned by somebody else and you're out there chopping down trees and shaving them into fucking shingles to build a roof, that's the only other way to do it. I mean, to do it completely off the grid.
And by the way, that is hardly ever sustainable. And people who live off the grid still need to go into town to get some basic fucking needs met.
Right. And you'll be dead by 40. You know?
Right. I mean, I'm just saying that, like, you know.
Good luck getting laid. You're going to find somebody who's going to go out there and fuck you in your hut that you built by yourself. Good luck, Ethan
Hawke. I'm, you know, I'm not saying
couch.
it can't be done, but that's just sort of something that I feel like to a certain extent you can get to a certain point with subsistence living, but there's still, you're going to have to rely on your community in your area for, you know, some other basic needs that help. Like, you can't, for example, subsistence living, you still need to go buy ammunition for your firearm.
Mm-hmm.
Right, unless you're mining the ore from the ground and then melting it into an alloy to shape into a bullet to put into the gun that you may just... Yeah, exactly.
Right, I mean, and yes, people bow hunt, I totally get it, but still, all of those things...
If we're getting to any point where we're talking about bow hunting, the conversation has gone off the fucking rails. Like, if that is the answer, is like, well, just build a bow and arrow. The end. Like, we're not living in the same universe.
Right. No, I'm just, I'm just kind of putting it like, that's the reality, is that even those people that are like, I live off the grid, and it's like, yeah, you live off the grid, but you probably have a town within like a certain, like a walking distance or some kind of situation. Like, I'm just thinking about like people in Alaska, like, yeah, they still have to go into town for like basic shit that they need, down to ammunition for their firearm to shoot the fucking bear that comes into their territory.
Right. So it's a yes from you because it represents all the things
I hate
you dislike. Yes. Okay. Great. And I will also say give the same level of hesitant yes, because while I think this is not a great movie, like if we pull it out of the cultural framework we're trying to contextualize here and just look at it as a movie, I think it's a pretty average to below average romantic comedy about young people together. And I think that, like we've already talked about, the supporting characters are pretty underserved. The main characters are kind of vapid, kind of empty, and a lot of plot points happen that kind of don't seem very realistic if we look at them in a vacuum. But, it does represent all the things we talked about in this conversation, and it does address those issues, doesn't come to a coherent conclusion about them, but it does. That bundle of contradictions is the early 90s, you guys. That's it. So while this movie is a fucking zero, yes, it needs to go on to the next generation because it represents and demonstrates all those things from that time period.
Yeah.
And also, Winona looks really cute in this movie. And she's very charming and very charismatic. And you see why she's a movie star. Even, her riffing on the big gulp, and smoking cigs in her apartment, talking on the phone with the 900 number. Like, it's real cute. She does it very well. So, artifacts? Anybody have an artifact from this they want to keep? Or
I'm taking the big gulp.
The big gulp. All right. Shrishma, what do you got?
I didn't pick artifact.
Everything else just looks like shitty.
Yeah, it was kind of like even like the scenes of like the room, it was nothing so interesting.
I'm going to pick 2 lit cigarettes and 2 half-full cups of coffee from their walking around scene.
There you go.
There's some good diner footage in this movie. I mean, that was a thing that, like, I as a diner person, like, that really struck me. It's just nice to see people at a fucking diner eating breakfast foods, smoking cigs inside, drinking coffee. Like, that was the 90s. That's living.
Speaking of, we need to wrap this up because I need to go to the local diner where people are not smoking inside. But so I can go get some diner coffee, breakfast, and a big ass Bloody Mary.
Gotcha. Okay. So, Shrishma, did you have an artifact? I forget.
No.
No.
You didn't have anything and nothing's coming to mind? Okay. That's totally fair. This is not that type of movie. So, with that being said, Carolyn Naoroz, you are choosing next week's motion picture film through time and or space. What are we going to be talking about next time?
We are going to be talking about, I need to look up the year. I'm so sorry. I think I know what it is. Yeah. I'm sorry. I needed to make sure that I was going to give you the right year. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I know what it is. 1996 is Romeo and Juliet.
Oh my god!
Wow. Okay.
It is so 90s.
So we went from Winona Wednesdays to Leo Land. It's
to
like,
Leo Land. I mean,
this isn't even peak Leo, but it's like on the upslope for Leo, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think every friend of mine had a poster of Leonardo DiCaprio from this movie.
For sure.
So I just feel like I want to balance out reality bites with something that's not realistic because it's Romeo and Juliet, and it's Baz Luhrmann, but it is so 90s.
I'm so excited. I've only seen it one time, so this will be great to go back to it, and that sounds fantastic.
You know,
so with that, all that being said,
Shakespeare.
yeah, we'll see what it looks like. Shakespeare with handguns.
We should also not forget that it is not just Leonardo DiCaprio; it is Claire Danes.
That is true.
That's right.
I was going to say she is my highlight of that movie.
Yeah.
Does this mean that we're going to be talking at least a little bit about My So-Called Life and its importance to the 1990s? Can I talk about? Can you give me a corner to talk about that? If I promise to not talk about the music, can I talk about
when I hand it over to you? No, you can talk with me. This particular movie is very music heavy, and we're going to talk about it.
I tried really hard.
It's also not your music.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So maybe, I'll give you.
We're going to talk about the music.
What early 90s thinks of late 90s, I guess. Just real quick, before we close it down, did you guys make it through to the fake? There was like a fake out at the end credits of this movie where they ran the cast and then it cuts to another scene. There's like a stinger scene a la Marvel. Did you guys make it through?
No, because I was fast forwarding at the end to just get through all the Loki shit. I literally was like, oh God, forward.
It's really funny because it shows a clip of the show that the Ben Stiller character ends up making based off of these characters. So Lelena becomes Elena and Troy becomes Roy, and they're both played by different people. So it's just a scene between the two of them. The Winona character is played by Karen Duffy, aka Duff, who was an MTV VJ at the time. We did some movies. She's in Blank Check and Dumb and Dumber, I think. And then the guy who plays the Ethan Hawke character is Evan Dando, who is the lead singer of the band called the Lemonheads. And also in this movie is Dave Pirner from Soul Asylum. So you have these grunge figures like guest cameoing in the background. Anyway, it's really funny because it's just a real short scene between the two of them where she's like, I just need your commitment. And he's like, my commitment's to the band and my music. And I need you to understand that if you're going to love me. So it's making fun of the whole, it's being self-aware and it's kind of funny. But anyway, that's it for Reality Bites. We've given it way more time than maybe it deserves. And we're going to close it down. So Carol and Shrishma, thank you so much for enduring, reality as it bites, reality blows.
It kind of bites sometimes.
And also, we need to acknowledge the fact that its usage comes from the re-edit that Ben Stiller makes in this movie, and it's referencing reality bites, as in like bite-sized pieces, like reality bites. So it's a double meaning, you guys. Double meaning. Anyway, that's it for now. So, is it? All that being said, until next time, thank you so much for listening. Please follow us on the grams, of course, at Time Machine Podcasts. Write to us if you wanna. Partyline at oldmovietimemachine.com. And until next time, please never forget that this has been Old Movie Time Machine. Oops. All 90s.
I'm a human being with deep feelings who feels things deeply.
Music is feeling, babe. The band may be a small dream, but it's the only one I've got. I'm Audi 5000.